Welcome. Today is Thursday, November the 3rd, 2022. And this is the Mbongi. I am your host, Brother Asarimhotep of the Martin Delaney Center for Egyptology. And today we have a powerful interview from a powerful guest. David Muniz Supple. I'm not pretty sure I'm pronouncing the middle name correct, but he can correct me when he comes on. And today's topic is going to be on classical architecture's African roots, the title of the upcoming book by our guest. And we're going to talk about his life, how he got on the subject, and much more. All that and more when we return in just a moment. And welcome back. Again, I'd like to thank each and every one of you for catching the live. We're on 3 platforms streaming today, on Facebook, of course, YouTube, and on Twitter. So I'd like to thank each and every one of you who are, again, catching us live. And then, of course, those of you who are catching the archive. And we have a very, good discussion today. So I look forward to our conversation. But of course, I just want to shout out everyone who has made themselves known on the YouTube chat. So peace and blessings to Lamar and Robert Rand and Sister Tamika and Tony Mason and Octo Thorpe is in the building, and Craig Amun Ra. And of course, those on Facebook and those on Twitter. Your comments don't necessarily come directly here, but I will try to acknowledge you as I go back and forth and see you there. So, as discussed earlier, we have with us David Muniz Supple, who is an architect. He's a Tufts alumnus and CEO of one of Boston's leading luxury architectural design build firms, New England Design and Construction. He is a thought leader in the fields of sustainable luxury home design and architectural design build. He is also a public speaker, a humanitarian, and author, and is currently amid 2 book projects. And so we'll discuss hopefully both of those projects, but definitely one by the title of today's conversation today. So without further ado, I want to welcome our guest, David Muniz Supple. Am I saying that correctly?
You are. You got it perfectly. I know I'm going to pronounce words incorrectly in this interview, so please feel free to correct me.
No doubt. Well, first and foremost, thank you for coming on the platform and sharing your wisdom on this particular subject. And it's an honor to have you here, and I look forward to this conversation.
Oh, well, thank you, Asar. It's my pleasure. And, I'm missing a lot of the acronyms behind my name that most of your guests I've seen have. So I'm gonna do my best, and I'm gonna stick to what I know.
No doubt. Well, first and foremost, since you were new to this platform and our guest, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, how did you get into architecture, and then kind of what led to the book.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I'm actually the same age as you. I found out the other day talking to you. So, but I grew up outside of New York City in a suburb of Connecticut, and had a great upbringing, great parents. Got into architecture in high school. I had an art history class where I was kind of inspired, where this teacher had been to all these different lands and showed pictures, and I was pretty amazed, captivated by that. That's what started me down the path of architecture. And so I got a degree in architecture. I started practicing as an architect. And in a short amount of time, I realized I had no clue what the hell I was doing. Like completely insecure and deficient in my ability to direct others how and what to build, which is essentially the job of an architect. But the problem was I had never built anything in my life. And so it just didn't make sense to me. And so I started to look into the history of the profession. And what I found was that the architect was the builder throughout history, was just the best builder. The derivation of the word architect means master builder. And that in the mid 1800s, it was split. And it was then made to appear that it had always been separated. And so I did a lot of research into that. It's what led me to discovering, the topic of this book, Classical Architecture's African Roots. But initially for some years, that was my focus on reintegrating the industry from, this blue collar, white collar perspective, because the divide has really hurt the industry and the end consumer and the client. And so, from that studies, I honed in on the group that made this separation, which was in the middle of the 1800s. You had a group of the best builders, best architects, same thing at that time. Like you look in an English dictionary and the words are synonyms. If you look up architect. And the problem they were trying to solve is that they could not reach the highest social status at that time, which was that of a gentleman, which came from England, which was, it was actually an England census. So it was like and per the definition of a gentleman, you could not be associated with manual or physical labor. So kind of hard when you build things. And so they created the American Institute of Architects initially in 1837 with the stated purpose to raise their social status. And the way they did that, one of the ways they did that was to distance themselves from the trades from which they came. And it worked out great for them. They started wearing suits instead of work clothes, and they got to, reach, be on par with the clients they served. And, that was the start of the path of the disconnect. And then they got it into the universities, the way an architect was trained. They got it switched from a apprenticeship system, which had been true going back to ancient Kemet up until, the mid 1800s. They got that changed into a university curriculum. That's the way you became an architect now instead. And the first institution they got the curriculum established in was MIT, to go along with their goal to raise their status, prestigious university. And so that's why nobody knows this, because the history books are written by the universities, and it kind of it goes along with the flow of what they're doing. And I found that to be very true, and that is wherein I stumbled upon, like I said, the subject of this book.
All righty. Now you bring up a very interesting topic, which could be a show unto itself, because especially in my community, when you say a gentleman, the first thing that comes to our minds is somebody of good manners, and good character, and don't realize that that's a kind of a social class title. And there's this book. I can't remember it right now. I'll find it. But this is when I first heard about it, because it's a book about American history and the four cultures that dominated, coming from England. And so it talked about the gentleman's class and how they were allowed to get away with certain things here in the United States. But I wonder to what degree, if any, there's a connection in terms of like women gravitating towards individuals that would so-called be in that class, while they kind of shun, the I guess what they would call the blue collar worker, so to speak, like what that history would be.
Yeah, I haven't done an extreme deep dive into it. I do know a little bit about it, and I think like today we know it as an adjective, and it's not a negative context, and I don't know that that status as a whole was a bad thing per se, but I do know that it comes from kind of like the Middle Ages in terms of chivalry and knighthood, and initially it was very much like the word gentleman comes from Gentile, which the root I believe is of good birth. You were kind of like born into it, and it makes sense if you think about more like times of royalty, wherein that was really dictated your standing. And then you had, and that was around in England, but then it became more like kind of still I think birthright. The thing with America, where I think it changed a little bit, is you had more ability to raise up in status that wasn't necessarily dictated by your where you came from, at least for white folks at that time. So it was kind of, that was the play is that they were looking to reach that status.
And I just remembered off the top of my head the book that I was referring to. It's called Albion Seed, Four British Folkways in America. And so this was my introduction to the whole. This was published initially in 1989 of the gentile class and how it expressed itself here in the Americas as an extension of that British culture.
Yeah, that culture. I mean, that's where you talk about early 1800s is like America's was an English colony less than 100. It was like not too far from that time period, 50 years ago. So it was very heavily influenced by that culture. And the AIA has a predecessor in England called RIBA, which is the Royal Institute of British Architects, that heavily influenced the creation of the AIA. A lot of there was connections there as well. So
I wonder now if this isn't too far off topic, the relation, if any, of like the rise of masonry, the quote unquote speculative masonry, as it wasn't necessarily connected to the physical building of things, and they made it kind of an operative, or I guess what they say, speculative kind of ideas and things, and to where people can still kind of latch on to that industry, but in a different way in those kind of circles. I wonder if like that was kind of that was kind of earlier than what you're saying.
I don't know. I'm not. I haven't. I know little about that. If there's a connection to religion with that, maybe I do see that. These guys were Christian, and that their understanding of the Bible and kind of that definitely influenced the denial of what they knew to be true in regards to classical architecture's African roots. You know, that's wherein the stories coincide.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's because you mentioned earlier in terms of the whole apprenticeship, and I know, well,
Yeah.
especially in Africa, like each guild, had its own quote unquote secret societies that really taught the ins and outs
Yeah.
of the field, and this is where a lot of and we can kind of get to this a little later, but this is where a lot of kind of they deem them religious ideas, and kind of frameworks, you know, that belong to those particular types of guilds. So it's, I guess you would even see the same thing even in Christianity, because they were primarily nomadic pastoralists. So a lot of the ways in which they reference things is from a nomadic pastoralist, which is why you still call your quote unquote reverend a pastor.
Mm.
you know um and even in ancient Egypt, those who were shipbuilders and dealt with the docks, when they would articulate things, it would be in the frame of the shipbuilding industry, and the same thing with the farmers, and the same thing with the metallurgists and the like. But so essentially, you stated that there's this, at one time the architect and the actual builder were one and the same.
Yes. For the
And
majority of civilization, which is in
mm,
kind of makes a lot of sense once you think about it.
and so at some point in the United States, at least, there was a split of the architect and the builder, and it was for social class reasons. um, and in discovering that, within that kind of within that research, this somehow led you to Egypt. So what
Yeah.
was it about that conversation that
Yeah.
led you
So
to Egypt?
I was writing about this topic. You know, I
Mhm.
was really digging into the history of it, and I consider myself an expert on this topic, maybe the only one, because all the history books, you kind of have to read the history books and then dig into the footnotes, because these history books were written with a certain motive in mind, and like, or a certain conclusion already put there, which is that they were always separated. So then they would take passages and things from the past and put it under the context of today, which it was not in the
Mhm.
past, right? And so I would dig into the original sources and really just uncover this thing. But one article I had written was on Tuskegee University. Today, what is kind of known as the reintegration of the architect and builder is known as design build. And
Mhm.
a lot of major universities today will have design build curriculums within their architectural school. It is a very positive thing. It's still a little bit like it's like a token class. It's still under the umbrella of this separation, but it is becoming much more popular. There's over 100 programs now that have some sort of design build curriculum. And I wrote a blog article that acknowledged Tuskegee University as being the first, which
Mhm.
had previously had not seen been acknowledged properly. I had seen the Bauhaus, which was in Germany in the early 1900s. This is pre-Nazi. Uh, there was that was kind of what had been acknowledged as the first design build school. But at the end of the late 1800s, at Tuskegee University, there was a design build program. It's how a lot of the school was built, in fact.
Mhm.
And so I wrote this blog article about this. There's pictures that's amazing. You can see the students. the students in the drafting room, and then they're out framing buildings. And it's really what we need to get back to in terms of the education of my industry. And I wrote this article just acknowledging this story. And I had somebody comment on it, which was Mr. Melvin Mitchell, who is a Black architect who's written several books, one of which was African American Architects. It's a book he wrote. And we got in touch through this article. I read his book. And in his book, he has like a page or two on he just touches it, but he shows a picture of Hatshepsut's temple. And I was reading this book and I was like kind of froze in my tracks, because the context you got to understand is I've spent hundreds of hours looking at pictures of buildings, and I had never seen, particularly at school, and I had never seen this building before, and I could not believe it. And if you know this Hatshepsut's temple, which I think probably a lot of your audience does, it's extremely classical in nature. And he references he kind of takes it up and then goes off something else, but he references there's a debate on Martin Bernal and the classicists that opposed him. And I had no awareness of it whatsoever. This was probably like 3 years ago. All of this was completely new to me. But that building, separately from the track I was already on, I just couldn't believe it. And it got me to just start to look into that. And I originally was intending to write like 1,000-word blog on it. And that 1,000-word blog turned into what I am releasing very soon, which is Classical Architecture's African Roots, because as I started to dig into it, I could not believe what I found. And I just kept digging and digging and finding it. And until that's really where it came from, because there was no cohesive text that you could find that showed what you could find, like very broken up and incrementally, without pictures, by the way, in many of the cases, which is ridiculous because it's architecture. Like, you can just see it and kind of understand it from that way. But so that's and I actually wrote most of the book before I found the connection. In the back of my mind, even the question that I had is like, how the hell did this happen? How could I go to school for architecture and be taught, something totally opposite? And what you're taught is that essentially, the Greeks and then the Romans perfected it, which was classical architecture, and it just kind of sprang from the ground with no previous influence. That's really what, I was taught, at least, and I think is representative of what most are taught today, and certainly what I have found to be true and validated through my research, if you just start to go online or what have you, or even looking at encyclopedias. But I was left with the question of like, how the hell did this happen? How the hell did this happen? And so I had a theory, which was like, I bet these same dudes who I know doctored this stuff on, I bet. And so I started to look, and guess what I found? I found that to be very true. I have a book back here. I don't know if I can pull it out, but it's, if there was a founder of the founders of the American Institute of Architects, it would be this gentleman named Thomas Utstick Walter. And he came up from the masonry trades. That was kind of his guild, became an architect. He's most known for being the architect of the Washington, D.C. Dome, our capital, the country's capital. And he was one of the original founders of the AIA. And I was kind of like suspected him. I knew he owned slaves. And and he was the first American architect to publish anything on the history of architecture. And so I got that book, which I have here somewhere, and to my surprise, what I expected to find was him saying that kind of like skirting over it, right? Skirting over the Egyptians. And I'm like, I bet. But what I actually found is that he acknowledged the ancient Egyptians profoundly. Like everything I had discovered in my book, writing my book, he wrote in his. Like every facet of classical architecture, he was acknowledging that the Greeks got it from the ancient Egyptians. And I was kind of like a little confused, but then there's a footnote where it says he literally started to cross out what he knew to be true and supplanting it with a more Euro, I don't know how to put, like he basically started to erase what he knew to be true and put other information there. And it's representative of kind of the beginning of the start of people like him who had a vested interest in positioning the architecture that they were practicing. And if you look at the Washington Capitol, it's actually like, and then you look at Hatshepsut's temple, it's actually like totally similar. The central staircase, the colonnades. So he knew those were the originators of the architecture he was practicing. And I also know from writings I found, and I just started to really dig into this dude, and I found I knew he owned slaves, and then I found basically a text. He was very Christian, and he was did Bible studies, and he was the presenter, and he wrote out his Bible group, what he was going to say or what have you. And I found a Bible study where he references the curse of Ham, and he references that whatever that quote is, that that's taken to justify slavery and colonization. It's like destined to be servants of servants or something to this degree. He quotes it. Now that relates very much so with the Egyptians, because it shows, we don't even have to get into the discussion of like, were the Egyptians black or white? Because this dude thought they were, based on the Bible studies that he gave. He associated Ham with black people, which was the king of the Egyptians. And so, it gives some understanding of the context of why he started to cross these things out, because of what he knew to be true, because it didn't fit with, this going back to what I knew their play was from the beginning, was to raise their social status. So they were looking to separate themselves from anything, that wasn't going to position themselves with this status they were looking to achieve. And that's what I found to be how, that history got wiped out. And what I found previous to the 1800s, it was common knowledge. Like he wrote in his book, it was common knowledge. And I found other history books wherein, they show and openly communicate like, yes, the Greeks got it from the Egyptians.
For those of you who are just joining us, we are here with Mr. David Supple, who is an architect, humanitarian, and now an author of the forthcoming text, Classical Architecture's African Roots. And if you are enjoying this conversation, I'm going to need each and every one of you to That is right. Hit the like button, Make sure that you share this conversation with friends and colleagues. And if you have not subscribed to the channel, please subscribe today and make sure that you hit the bell so that you will be notified when we have these powerful conversations. And so now I want to kind of go into a few details in terms of, in your research, when you're looking at the ancient Egyptian architectural designs and the Greek, what are some of the commonalities that stood out to you the most?
Yeah. I mean, I had a pretty decent understanding of quote unquote classical architecture, in terms of Greek and Roman architecture based on my studies and what I do for a living, right? And so I started to look at pictures. I just started to look at pictures and kind of chase down similarities I saw. It was very important to me in my research. I had a cutoff date, anything that was earlier to present time than 1000 BC, I ignored. And if when you start to do this research, a lot of it is commingled. It's not differentiated. You got to really like kind of pull the string to make sure. And on a lot of the research I did was online. So there's all sorts of misinformation. So there was like buildings inaccurately placed and dated, and so it was really important to me to just. And the significance of that is that, after was like more like whatever 600 BCs is when Egypt started to have invaders come in and they adopted the culture, but there was more influence from outside. And so I wanted to make sure there was that cutoff where it could not be construed like, oh well, that came in from here or whatever. But just the basic column types to start with, in ancient Greece, you have, and I have my own kind of theories of what really went down. But I was just looking for, okay, a Doric column. Okay, wow, I see these, and Hatshepsut's temple has that as well. The Doric column is they call it proto-Doric. And very similar. So that was one aspect. I'm happy to share my screen too, Asar, if you'd like me to kind of through some of these things.
Yeah, you can. You just hit the present button.
Okay.
At the bottom, and then it'll give you some options.
Okay.
And how you want to do that, and then I'll share it. Once you do that. And while we are waiting on that, our guest does have a website, so you can find out more about him and his upcoming projects and the like. And I guess this will be one of two or one of many places that you can, download the book. As I understand it, you are actually offering it for free to the public.
I am.
So, so whenever you are ready,
I hit the I'm ready, but I don't know if.
So when you press present, it's going to give you
I got
a few options. So share screen. Okay, there we go. So boom. All right.
Can you see it?
Yes, and you can press the that hide button.
Okay. Oh, perfect. So
hold on, it went back to your main screen.
Oh, okay.
You have to.
That happened after I hit the hide button.
Okay. Well,
maybe I'll go back and not hit. I don't know how to undo the hide button.
Are you sharing from your PowerPoint?
Yes,
Or
PowerPoint.
see, I think if you're a computer scientist or architect, you probably have two screens.
Yes, I do.
And so that's why it looked the way that it does. But
Okay.
it looks like you shared that book, so you did share it with me. So we can do this.
Yeah.
Just let me know where you want to go.
Yeah, I mean, you could start this chapter 1. I can kind of dive into, and I'm making this free because I'm very interested in making this accessible on the widest sphere possible. And this book is really a picture book, and that is also done with the intention to make it as accessible as possible and really easy to assimilate, really easy to share, because as many books as I'm sure your audience reads, most people don't read books, but they will look at pictures. And this story is really effectively told with pictures. I consider this kind of the missing piece, almost like the smoking gun that in this conversation needs to be there, because it is so visual that there's a certain powerfulness in that. And the book follows the same format. There's 20 basic chapters where I take up a different aspect. I start with these quotes, like from the encyclopedia or these credible sources, where I'm like, hey, here's what we're taught currently on this topic. And what we're taught currently on this topic is basically like everything that's great in architecture started in ancient Greece. And then I pose in each chapter, I say, now I want you to look and I want you to see if what we're taught is true or not. And this is the beginning of that. This is looking down a colonnade at Saqqara. Am I saying Saqqara right?
We don't know how it's actually pronounced, but that's how most folks pronounce it.
Cool. Yeah. And I just say, hey, we're going to start to look. This is kind of the prelude. The next chapter, I get into pyramids. And so in architecture school, and I think, most folks, when they think of Egyptian architecture, they go to pyramids. That's kind of what's put there. Even like when looking at Imhotep, who was, really he it's kind of like, the first pyramids. That's what he did. But if you look at Saqqara's site as a totality, there are so many classical details in that site alone. That was one of the things I found early, was like, I can't believe it. And really, it's almost like the pyramids are used to disguise it. Because it's actually hard to miss, like not take a picture if you're on the ground of the pyramids and miss some of these other elements. So these are things like, to the right and to the left, those are very similar to the Greeks' Doric column, in terms of you have these flutes, vertical flutes with the capital, which is the top of the column, which is, this basic block. But these are other, classical elements that you don't see standing right next to the pyramids. And that's the whole complex right there.
Yeah.
And really, one of the things for me, as somebody who owns an architecture firm, who does this for a living, and I think it's applicable to all things, but when you get to really the root, like the true origins, like foundational, like, oh, this is where this came from. I have such a greater, deeper understanding for classical architecture now than I did, because I've looked at the true roots and source of it. And a lot of that is kind of taught, like in a kind of a round way, way, like, but and it's kind of modified because it's like they're starting with the Greeks, and so they're missing all this stuff that came before. My theory is really like when the Greeks were readmitted into ancient Egypt, I think it's 650 BC, there was a ban lifted. They could freely travel in ancient Egypt. My theory is basically they were amazed. They couldn't get over what they were seeing, and they perfected and selected certain aspects of it to develop and really perfect and made their own, because they had to, because they were looking at buildings that had a over 2,000-year-old lineage of stone temple building. There was no way they were going to have the breadth and variety that you found in ancient Egypt, and so they consolidated it essentially and picked certain aspects, and that's where in the ancient Greeks you have three styles essentially. The ancient Egyptians had over 30, much broader, in variety, and so that's what I see occurred. That picture there is of Stonehenge, and that's it again in the history books. Like when we're in architecture school, okay, Stonehenge. This is the first post and lintel structures. Posts are columns, lintels are beams, and that's really textbook in terms of what the current status quo is. And what I'm pointing out here is that in Giza, these post and lintel structures actually predate what you find in Stonehenge. But that's not, it's first of all completely omitted. All the focus is put on the pyramid, and what's standing right besides them is omitted. That actually predates, what is presented as the original, structure, which was then followed for all buildings. And if you look at these side by side, I mean, it's incredible how developed the ancient Egyptian structures are comparative to what you found in Europe at that time.
And I've never really kind of paid attention to this in terms in comparison to this, but you're talking about like the two pillars with the block on top.
Those are columns. That's what you're saying. Yeah, this is a significant technology that, Stonehenge is used as the example of, look, this is an advancement for mankind. Now we're using these posts and beams, but not only, and it's pretty basic, right? And not to, disparage it or say there isn't, incredibleness there, but what you find in Africa during the same time period is much more advanced, very refined. And, if we were to look at that from a classical architecture lens, this is approximately 2,000 years prior to the ancient Greeks. Okay. It's incredible. That's a comparable amount of time between us and the ancient Greeks, but if you understand classical architecture, you're going to look at that and say, oh, wow, those are very similar to what you would call Doric columns, or even later the Romans called Tuscan columns. And then on top of that, there's the beam is called an entablature in classical architecture, and that is broken down into specific components, and you can see it existed much earlier, in Africa than in Greece, for which our history books teach us is where it started. But you can see very clearly That's not true. This is the Parthenon on the right, and all these buildings are comparing the structure and how similar you have in Karnak. The structure is very similar. This is not to scale. The temple in Karnak is twice the size of the Parthenon. But in terms of their structure, extremely, extremely similar. And this is really, and you can find this in academic texts. You can find it being credited that the Greeks were exposed to monolithic stone temple building in ancient Egypt, and then in a span of 50 years from their admittance, you then see the first Greek stone temples, whereas prior you do not. One of the things we're taught is that the ancient Greeks built in wood, and that their stone temples were an emulation of and a modification of what they had previously built in wood. I found that to be very untrue. I found it to be true in relation to the ancient Egyptians. I found that they, going back before you see their first stone temples, which is 2650 BC, you see examples. There's still models that survive that show they used wood and other materials and then carried it forward into stone. That's really where that occurred. The Greeks were really just emulating what they saw in ancient Egypt. This is a mock-up which was actually built in England that goes over what the Greeks built in wood, supposedly, before they built in stone. But it's a reflection more accurately of what you would have seen built in wood in ancient Egypt. And now one, is a pretty granular, like I'm in the weeds with it point. But if you look at those columns, it's a bound.
Sorry, the ballot boxes.
I have no idea. It's probably upstairs.
It's a bound of reeds. So, skinny trees or wood-like plants where they cut the stalks, they bound them together, and they created a column. And that the idea is that in stone, that's why you have these vertical flutes, because it was emulating, and which very much proves itself out, because they even in the stone, they even carved out the rope that bound it together. And that is is talked about. Oh yeah, and this is an example of like, hey, this is how the Greeks did it. But a small point, which I think makes my point. You can't look at all these pictures and not come away with any other conclusion. But in ancient, in Greece, all their three styles, the flutes, were concave versus convex. Concave means that it goes inward. Concave means it comes out. So if you look at that column, that's convex. It comes out. It's like a rounded, whatever material was used there was round poles. And the round poles, creates a cup that comes out. It doesn't go in, it comes out. And but in actuality, they were convex, or they were concave. They go in. And the point I make is that is created from papyrus. And you could see that picture you were just going over there with the piece of papyrus that's cut is triangular. And if you bound a group of these reeds, cut papyrus, you would be left with the shape of the flutes, of a concave nature, which is what you saw in Greece.
Mm.
And so it's the point here is that, you know, they didn't even have papyrus. Papyrus was only native along the Nile. So there was no way they started off with papyrus in wood and then switched to stone. It proves my point of like it was the progression was, you know, from wood to stone in ancient Egypt and then from stone to stone in Greece, because they didn't even have the material in wood from which to create that.
Mm. Interesting.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's you know, if for those who actually, you know, who have never been to Egypt, you know, this is, you know, accurate. You see the the columns at the top, the the association with vegetation.
Yeah.
Um, and even there's a few temples that I've been in where even at the bottom of the temple, you see waterways
Wow.
that they've carved into the bottom. So when we go back to like this image here, the temple is representative of these kind of papyrus swamps, to where at the bottom of the temple you'll see the water. It's artificial water, of course, but you'll see the carvings of the water, and then these representations, you know, of the papyrus reeds, and which is interesting. Just to give y'all kind of a preview, this same idea and logic is what you kind of see in the word for Kemet here. Like this is, I'm arguing that this is a more expanded version of what became quote unquote Kemet, in terms of the hieroglyph itself, that is a hill with the first buds of the papyrus reeds. But this, you see the full mound with the entirety of the papyrus mound. I mean the papyrus plants, whereas the Kim glyph, it was just the first buds. Um, in this same logic, but the point being that their inspiration is nature itself, and
Yeah.
and trying to duplicate the function of nature.
Yeah. I think,
And go ahead. I'm sorry.
yeah, for me as a, you know, coming from that, you're taught, you know, and an inspiration is nature, but to have a full conceptual understanding of that, I can't tell you how much it's helped me to see this and really understand it, because you're kind of told that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, hey, nature is the original architect. That's you know, a means for inspiration. But then at the same time, you're taught, hey, the Greeks had 3 orders, and these were the orders, and you need to confine to these rules that were set because they have been proven to be found to be beautiful and proportioned properly. And if you just stick to this, you're going to be all right. But it misses the full understanding, the full scope, conceptual understanding of where it comes from, which is nature. You know, the ancient Egyptians, like you said, with all their capital types, is very based on nature. One of the chapters I go into the golden ratio, and how that was most is credited to the Greeks, but most definitely is inherent and known about, you know, by the ancient Egyptians. And they you know, saw what they saw in nature, and they discovered these patterns, and you know, that's where the Greeks learned from. They then kind of codified it into these 3 styles, we're taught that in architecture school that the three styles emulate the ideal man, the ideal woman, and then a maiden, like a younger woman. That's the Doric, Ionic, Corinthian, have their basis in the ideal form of different humans, which is nature, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's not done with the full understanding of where it really comes from. And so there's not the fluidity and ability to create because you really understand where it comes from. You know what I mean? It becomes more mechanical and a little more rigid because the full understanding that of where it came from goes with it. This is the Parthenon is a great example. Like you can draw the golden ratio over the Parthenon, and it's you can find it all over the place. And it's like, hey, look, the Greeks were using this in their. But if I've done the same thing with several Commission buildings, and it's very evident that the lowest one is an actual artifact that was discovered around Saqqara's site, which shows the exact curve of the golden ratio as instructions. Those hieroglyphics are dimensions of the height at each point. It was a plan given to somebody to build a roof line, and it exactly matches. The Greek that's credited with. I don't get into this. This is a picture book. So I don't get into answering the question like, how the hell did this happen? I'm really trying to just establish this came from that. That's the result I'm looking to achieve from this book. I have done a lot of other research, which I get into in my next book, Restoring Africa's Legacy of Creation. One of those things is like, the Greeks that are credited as a lot of, the father of math, the father of geometry, this father of philosophy, what has been deemed all these fathers of, including Pythagoras, who is, it's actually not Pythagoras, it's Eleucid, I believe, is the Greek who is credited with discovering the golden ratio. He spent years in Kemet. So, not only do you have the archaeology evidence, but you have the historical context. It all kind of lines up of how it went down. It's just not what we're taught. And my hope is that the visual evidence will be able to, be spread and kind of like, it's hard to mess with. It's hard to argue with these pictures and what you can see from that.
And just to let y'all know, there's a lot more in terms of the chapters. He's going to the Corinthian, the arches, the stone carvings in terms of the
statues,
yes,
yeah,
and other details or whatnot. So it's I guess a chapter on the molding and the like. It's
the use of concrete, which the Romans are credited with arches, with the Romans. There was even domes in ancient Egypt, which the Romans are credited with. Yes, there is pretty much every significant aspect of classical architecture I have traced down and show visually. I show what we're taught, and then I let you examine and see for yourself and compare that and come up with your own conclusion.
Indeed.
Yes.
And you kind of in the book with a call to action. And what is the action?
One of them is to share it, spread it. That's part of why it's free, because I just want it to be shareable. And I want it to, like, when you Google, because when I was writing this book, or creating this picture book.
Mhm.
That was one of the things I couldn't believe, like how it was not already readily available. I want to make it readily available to not only architecture students, but society as a whole worldwide. And so we need to just let as many people as possible see for themselves. And then the sources with the misinformation need to correct themselves. So I have a petition that calls for the 30 plus sources, which I reference in the book, some of which are, Encyclopedia Britannica. Most of them are online sources. Wikipedia has a lot of misinformation on it. A lot of online encyclopedias have been regurgitating, what these institutions, these prestigious universities put down, and so it calls for them to, come to the table, amend their information, and set the record straight on that. And I think they will. I think, for the most part, is a small minority that
Mhm.
put this into play. And once you can see for yourself, it's hard to get that out. You got the picture there. So I call for the petition, to sign the petition, to share it, and those are the main calls to action.
Indeed, indeed. And what I would love to see happen is the discovery of the tools that were used in the constructions, and to have, as maybe part of like the school curriculum, to where they would have to build miniature
Yes,
versions of
yes.
those things, using the techniques, to kind of be like a kind of proselytize for architecture, engineering. I started off in engineering,
Oh well.
but I ended up in computer science, because I was
They're more
coding.
related than you might think initially.
Yeah.
Everybody's going to be in the computer science eventually. Construction, architecture is all going to be computer science.
And this is when, well, I don't know how old it was, but I remember, because all engineers, you always start off with the fifth wheel design, but like they wouldn't let us start off in AutoCAD. Like you had to draw. So that's when we had the big tables or whatnot, and we had to kind of draw everything, and know the proportions and math and all that associated with these designs and the like. But it was fun, but it was boring at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And I was more of the creative on the web, and so Macromedia Flash and all the kind of 3D programs was coming out, and wanted to learn more about that, so I switched it up. But I always had that in the back of my mind in terms of design and structure and whatnot. And as I told you in our previous conversation, like I'm looking into building like tiny homes,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
and converting vans into living space. So now I'm paying more attention to like architectural design and what is all involved in that. It'll be a while before I can get very knowledgeable in it in my current state, but yeah, so I would hope in essence that this contributes to probably inspiring more folks to get, because we promote the sciences here, the STEM fields, and so this being one of them, more folks getting into architectures and kind of advancing, architecture's went a long way since you know, the days of Egypt, but you know, coming up with some creative new ways, new designs in that classical style, and what that would look like, you know.
Yeah.
But
I have grand schemes to do that, just that, you know, kind of like that mock-up you showed of the supposed Greek temple in wood.
yes,
There's a organization in Boston called Youth Build Boston, and it's
mhm,
essentially a design build school for, you know, underprivileged youth. And what I would like to do is, and I've done some lectures there, and what I would like to do is design and then build a structure in a prominent location in Boston. You know,
mhm,
think like Faneuil Hall, and have there be this structure of what is our kind of representation of a ancient Egyptian structure in wood. You know, like what you might have seen there in wood previously. Yeah, exactly. There's a model that was discovered in ancient Egypt. I have a picture of it. I think it's in this chapter, of a structure in. Maybe it's not. I think it maybe chapter 5, but it's a model that shows how the ancient Egyptians built in wood, essentially prior to stone. It shows the actual bundled. Maybe it's on the one on nature now that I'm thinking about it.
on the
I wrote the book. You'd think I should know it better than I do, but
look, I go through the same thing and stuff that I wrote.
yeah.
Uh, so,
But yeah, I would love to do that with this particular group. You know, the you
oh,
know
I'm sorry. Go ahead. I just
you
thought
know
of a question.
if you think about what the motives were behind those that were that's created this misinformation and got it adopted to be the status quo. If you look at back at what their motives were, is it was really you know, to raise their social status, to create like an exclusivity, to distance themselves. It wasn't to bring people together, wasn't to create better buildings, which is what a group charged with creating the built environment, that's what you would want them to have the purpose of. It'd be like, hey, how do we make better buildings? How do we help people in their day-to-day lives by making their buildings better? That was not it. It was to like, hey, we need to get our due. And so if you think about the motives of the industry, even though today, you know, the AIA is not that AIA. You know, only 2% of architects are black.
Hmm.
The first one thing I talk about in my second book is that the first black person admitted into the AIA was over 50 years after the end of the Civil War. They don't tell you when the second person, the black person was. And my theory is that it was like, you know, another decade or so after. You know, it's kind of like, okay, this is the first black. And it was like, you know, but it needs to be confronted and looked into, and you know, similar to how, you know, the professional baseball leagues have embraced and taken responsibility for that segregation that exists, and like, you know, they don't shy away from it. And I see that the underlying, you know, all buildings start with a thought. You know, that's the most powerful thing. That's what it all starts with. So if the thoughts behind the industry that we have today was to separate people and to create this exclusivity, no wonder that we have this segregation today still, in this disparity in, not only the color skin. It was, so it was also a blue and a white collar thing, and this adversarialness and this divisiveness that is so prevalent today. It really comes from the lies. It comes from the misinformation. And so this group, like Youth Build Boston, we need this is the youth. They know, and they need to know this information in my book, because they need to know their true legacy and from which they came, and embrace it, and run with it. Because it's being in this industry without that truth is like, the odds are against you, and they were against you intentionally from the beginning. So we really need to, for those people in this industry specifically, I really have a strong purpose to get this information to. And I think that, just going back to the computer science analogy, we even use similar terminology. You have the engineer, the architect, and as technology advances further and further and further, the lines between start to blur. You can build a building now, 3D print a building. So where did the computer science end, and where did the construction start, or where did the design end? If it's all push of the buttons, and when did the construction start? This integrated approach. And when I say that, where I started from was really, hey, let's get the architect and builder back together again. That was messed up, done for the wrong reasons, did not have a good effect. But it's integration in more ways than one. Because their motives were, to basically divide and get rid of anything that at that time and place was against their goal of raising their social status. But we're in a new age. We can get to the truth, and we can move past that, and it's there's so much more to this too. Like, it spans all industries. This is just architecture, but I know much more about this than I do, in terms of other industries that really have their roots in the foundational information from Kemet. It's more than just architecture. The kind of, I'm just taking the low-hanging fruit here because you can see it. But I hope it validates and kind of leads to further discoveries and validation of these other areas.
Indeed. One last question, and because this is the kind of the field that really kind of inspired me to get into the tiny home movement, even though they don't really talk about it, but it's just conversations that kind of led me to the tiny home. But it is the biomimicry movement. And are you familiar with that? And I was going to say, and if so, because I know their kind of focus is, kind of doing exactly what the ancient Egyptians and other communities have done in terms of looking at nature, looking into the function of it, of the design and the processes, and creating synthetic representations of that in a very sustainable way. And I know that at least I believe I read like sustainability in terms of your design and your construction. Yes. So I wanted to know if biomimicry was part of that that process, and if not,
I mean, a lot of it is nuts and bolts, and we deal with a lot of pre-existing homes, on the projects we specifically do in terms of like whole home renovations and additions. But I certainly have, a much, and what you're saying in terms of foundationally, the Kemites that's really where they came from is so true. And I think that's part of, it totally aligns with that movement that already exists, not only in architecture, but, in manufacturing and vehicles and looking at nature taking away, what can be there. So I don't have like a super duper example for you within
no,
my business structure, but I certainly have a greater appreciation and a higher understanding from researching the where it originally started. And yeah,
indeed. Well, I do appreciate your time, and you've given us so much thus far, and I can't wait to get the full text. And so, is there an estimated date that you?
Yes, I mean, really, what I have left, the book has been, the proofreading is done, the formatting is done. There's a graphic, which I have a placeholder for in now in the advanced copy you have, but it's I've been calling it my synthesis of my thesis, which is really, I'm trying to get so basic, like, okay, most people don't read books, but they look at pictures. Well, most people won't look at all the pictures. So if I could just show a person one picture and they kind of get the whole, synthesis of my thesis, and it's a graphical piece that is timeline, as well as shows you, visually where all the buildings were going and the timeline of classical architecture. So I have about a week, I anticipate, to complete that. And then, so it will still be, relatively early November. But I am posting content, on TikTok, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram every day leading up to the release. And so
I put Twitter here, and I should have put LinkedIn. I don't know why.
Twitter, I'm on Twitter actually as well.
Okay.
So you can leave that.
All right.
Yeah, LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn as well. That's the only one not on there, but I am putting them out there. So it's a way, if you're on any of those platforms, would love to be connected with you. Would love for you to share the material and the book when it comes out, because like I said, I'm really looking to make this information accessible and let people see for themselves the truth, which is so visually apparent. And if anybody has questions, I'd love to answer questions. I don't feel like I need to, if you don't end off on my behalf.
No, it's all good. And so, because there's going to be a slight delay by the time they hear it and whatnot.
Oh,
so
okay.
if you have any questions, please put it in the comment section, and I will post your question. But in the meantime, if you want to know more about our guest, the personal website is on the screen right now. And as mentioned earlier, he is the founder and CEO of nedesignbuild.com. Well, I mean, New England Design, Build and Construction, but you can go to nedesignbuild.com and learn more about the design. So I guess if y'all in the Boston and surrounding areas, or anywhere, I would assume that you can, get some work done if you're looking to get your home or investment properties redesigned and the like. you can go there, and the book will. Trying to see if I should share it now, because if they go there now, it's still under construction.
Yeah. I mean, really, just get connected with me on social media, because I'll put the link. The book will have its own website, which is Design Roots Africa. But if you go there now, it's gonna be live once, the day I release the book.
Okay.
And I will link from all the social media sites to it. But it'll have its own, website to download the book, and it'll be like a flippable ebook. So it'll have a book feel, but it'll be online. And my goal is to get the misinformation amended, and then re-release the book for print, to really be the textbook for classical architecture, and not have to have all the misinformation. Not it be a correction, but have it be the, what going forward is used to educate, the future on what is classical architecture.
Indeed, and it's going to be at David Muniz Supple on all of these different platforms, so y'all should be able to find them. And I'm not seeing any direct question, and I'm trying to scroll up to see if anyone had a statement, but everyone's just seem to be just really interested and keyed in to what you're saying. And this discussion in general is kind of been had in the community, but it's nice to see it from an actual architect who can look and see what is going on in the process, and to see things that we can't see as laypersons in this particular field. And so they're saying that we follow them. It's like we following it, and so it is.
I have not been to Egypt. I did this all. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. It's probably a bad thing. I bet when I do go, and I hope to be able to go soon, I will even see even more. And if there's points that you all seen, because I know you do have a familiarity, would love to get your feedback on it.
I still have hundreds of photos that I haven't even went through, because I just came back from Egypt earlier in June. So that was my third time going to Egypt, and
wow,
so it's just like this. It's those little things that you don't see, like the water carvings at the bottom of the temples, and it kind of goes from there. But we do have one question here in African Renaissance TV. Asks, what aspect of Greek borrowing architectural styles from Kemet was most striking to you? And also would love to hear your opinion on West African styles, if you've gone there, in terms of any architecture or building styles, if you're knowledgeable.
I'm really not at all. But I'm sure. I want to visit much more in Africa, and I do have an appreciation and awareness of architecture and other aspects of Africa. But the first question was, for me, the kind of the most things that stands out was there's this thing called entasis, which in classical architecture is kind of like how the column is not perfectly plumb up and down. It bows. There's a bulge at the bottom, and at the top it's a little skinnier. That's known as entasis. And this didn't stick out to me the most, but it's kind of like my favorite aspect of it. And if you read what we're taught now, there's like this discourse or dialogue, like, how did the ancient classical builders referring to Greeks and Romans, like, why did they come up with this? How did why did they invent this? Inaccurately acknowledging, crediting them. But if you look at ancient Egyptian architecture, you can see it clear as day. Pretty much all their column types, you have this bulge, some much more emphasized. And if you look at, there's this question of like, why were they doing this? The answer, if you understand that the ancient Egyptians really were coming from a basis of nature, that was their foundational starting point. And then you look go look into nature. What do you see? You see trees. Like if you look at a palm tree, which many of their columns emulated, you see entasis, you see a bulge. The bottom is thicker for the sake of structure. It makes sense, right? And then if you look at in Iraq, there may be in Africa, I bet there is, which I haven't seen, but in Iraq they still build with reeded columns, like they wrap the reeds, and that's still how they build today. And I have this picture in the book which shows one of their structures, and what do you see? Once there's weight put on this stack, it bulges, and you see the entasis. And I have a picture, it's probably my favorite picture in the book, where I have a palm tree, and then I have this structure where you can see entasis in the palm tree, and you can see entasis in the reeded columns. And, it's kind of these complex, these historians are trying to answer the question by looking at the wrong source. Yeah, that's it right there. They're trying to, because they don't have the foundational information. Where once you look at this, you're like, oh my gosh, yes, of course. It was just an emulation of what they saw in nature and in wood. And so now we're going to build it in stone. And so we're going to, have that shape. And it really highlights, my point, and makes, and it's also just the connection with nature. I love it. Just, that's kind of my favorite part. And it's actually the last thing I added in the book. So it's the most fresh in my mind.
It's interesting, the concept of the wrapping of, like, when you showed that bundle of like wood and the wrapping of the what do you call it, the
reeds. Yep.
Like a similar design structure in engineering issue is like when you see a water tower and they have those rings around the water tower because of the weight, saying of the water and how it gets and how they need that to keep it all together. And you have that kind of bulge to it. But you'll see these classical, but these like, especially like, on the East Coast, when like in New York, where you have those buildings that have the water towers, on top, you'll see like these rings that they have to put around it to deal with the weight, of it. And so it just seems like a very practical thing to do. And in terms, so it shows that it wasn't just simply, I see the design and we're just going to imitate it, but there was consideration in terms of the science, of it, in terms of weight, in terms of structural integrity. Like there was additional forethought in it, and it wasn't just
functionality,
simply,
for sure. You understand classical architecture much better with anything, it applies to all things by really looking at the true roots of it. And it hasn't really been inspected in a cohesive text, which is, what I'm hoping my book will show. It's not, and and I'm excited about it. There was a question about the arches, and like the Roman arches weren't particularly different than Kemet arches, So I'm not sure if anybody's familiar with. He's escaping my name, but I believe he's in Philadelphia, Drexel. But he's the professor. He originally is from Egypt, who has a lot of scientific information that the Egyptians used concrete. And I've spoken to him actually, and he told me that the only thing he needs to conclusively prove his theory and evidence is get a sample that he can test, but the Egyptian government will not let him.
I mean, he could probably just sneak it.
Yeah.
Take a chip off of, like, no one's gonna. It's all in rules.
Somebody needs to get him that.
Someone asked, and Mott asked, how basically do we revitalize African architecture without falling into a nostalgic imitation? In other words, how can we advance? That's a deep question.
I think really get to know and understand the fundamentals. And if you just start with nature, go look. Just start looking at nature, and you will find, some inspiration there, and that's what they did. So, if you just follow that path, I think it's they've given us a roadmap to do that. And, another thing that occurred for me was, which is wild, but when I started to, and there was it wasn't immediate, because I have been conditioned that, it took a little bit of time, but even me, who was digging into this so much, I started to walk out, and instead of seeing like, oh, these are Greek and European, I started to see African features and elements, and so buildings that were inherently classical, which had been conditioned to come from Europe and Greece and Rome and what have you, I started to see them as distinctly African. Like I could say, oh my gosh, that right there was taken from this. I've seen that, and the first time it was in this date, and so I had an appreciation. Like my environment did not change, right? But what I knew changed, and then what I saw changed, and that I want to have that occur for everyone, because that validation and that truth is so powerful that that needs to be appreciated properly, and without the actual understanding of where it really comes from, it's actually what you think is different.
Indeed. And well, I see he's followed. So Zane Montego said he couldn't find you on Twitter.
It might just be David. Oh, thank you, sir. Yeah, thank you.
For just in case anybody else had that same issue. So
yeah,
he says now he's following you.
And the petition will be clickable from the book, so you'll be able to jump off from the book to the petition.
All right. And it doesn't look like there's any more questions, but I want to again thank African Renaissance for his donation to the channel. It is greatly appreciated. Thank you. And yeah, when I look forward to this this text, and again, I appreciate you taking time out of your busy morning and having a conversation with you. He said everything. No, I don't think it was stolen. You can't steal a design. He answered the question in the
Was it
first
stolen? I mean,
part.
it's I get that a lot in terms of some dialogue, and it was basically I wouldn't say stolen. The source, the credit was given to the wrong people. That is the issue. It wasn't by the Greeks. The Greeks, as I know, Asar knows, and I'm sure the majority, they openly accredited the ancient Egyptians, for their knowledge, and it was much later. From what the
Yeah,
research I've done, it was literally, in the 1800s when that misinformation really. Up until then, it was from what I've seen, it was common knowledge, and openly espoused and acknowledged that the Greeks got it from the. I found that book, by the way. This is the guy.
and let me.
This is the first American to write lectures on architecture, and in it,
If you want to.
He very much credits the ancient Egyptians, but there's a
Yeah.
footnote where you see it says he started to cross it out. So it's not that it was stolen; it just hasn't been credited. That's the whole thing on like me being able to see now like what it actually is. The building hasn't changed. It's just what my understanding has changed.
Yeah, that's the kind of one of the central conversation in Martin Brunell's first text, and he frames it as the classical model versus the Aryan model of history. So the classical folks, the ancient Egyptians, the ancient Greeks, when they always gave deference to the ancient Egyptians, and even suspected, for example, certain of their deities originating, from ancient Egypt. And there are records in which, like I know Theophilo Benga in his text on African philosophy, has a citation where they give you the cost of travel from Greece to Egypt, and to know where to go to get certain to go to school to learn about certain information. So this information has been known. It's just, as you stated in the beginning of the conversation, this whole thing of slavery and the justifications for it had to shift the paradigm in terms of who these people were.
That's right.
In relationship to Africans in general, because of course, in order to enslave, they had to think of African people as cattle, as non-human. But you can't argue that they're not human, and they're building structures, and they have medical industries and farming and the like, and philosophy. And so that's when that shift kind of happened in the 1700s going into the 1800s, the late 1700s going into the 1800s. And so that was the essential thrust of that conversation. And I want to say there was one more. Why is it so hard for the world to accept the African origins of architecture, but it wouldn't be a problem if it originated anywhere else?
Yeah, I mean, we've been conditioned. I think the world has been conditioned. I can speak for myself. I grew up in a pretty, diverse area, but even like reading this book, it changed things for me in my when I thought of Africa previous to this, I thought of, not good conditions, basically. One could generally surmise that as an inferiorness. And I wasn't born that way. Those were the images, and that's what I was conditioned to be.
Hmm.
But so there's just a lot of misinformation out there, and that misinformation has done a lot of damage to the point where we are here today. And part of why I don't go into the full-fledged motives and and I just want to put it out for people to see is because I just want them to see that and just make that point. Like, yes, that came from there. And then naturally, the question does come for anybody. It's like, why, if it's so evident, how come we don't know this already? That question is going to come. And they'll be open to it because they've seen for themselves, like, something's not right. They've been lied to. And so, we just need to keep putting the truth. That's why, Asar's work, and I'm so extremely grateful to be connected to you, because I see the extreme diligence you put into your work, and it's really incredible. So we need more of that. And the truth, we just need people to look, and the lies will crumble. We'll start to one thing I've started to talk about is, if you go back far enough, we all have our roots in Africa, all mankind. And we are one race that has been duped into believing that there's these, differences, but it's all lies. And when you get to the truth, you're left with the fact that, we can all be proud of this legacy and as a human race. And so, yeah.
Last thing, and I'm assuming that this person came a little later, but he says, where is the link to the book? As he stated,
there is no link yet.
Yeah, there's no link just yet. You'll have
connect
to
with me on social media. I will be posting every day up until the release. I don't have an exact date. There's one component which I'm looking to wrap up, which I expect will be another week or so. And the designrootsafrica.com is where the book will be downloadable. It is not live yet, so if you put that in now, it's just going to give you like a GoDaddy site. But yeah, please connect with me now, and that's how you'll be able to download it.
Well, thank you again. This has been a very powerful show, and
thank you.
No, so go
I want to share one more thing. I had it in my head. I know you know this, but what I've come to realize is the truth is that Africa actually raised up. I didn't know any of this before I started researching it, but the period of time before Greek's classical period, which is what changed is they were admitted into Kemet, is known as Greek's Dark Age. Literally, that's what the classicists say. That's like the historical academics agree on that, is like, hey, this was Greek's Dark Age. The truth is that, Africans brought Europeans out of their darkest age. And, that is the truth. And this is the visual evidence that I hope has been missing that will help change things.
Indeed. And everyone is saying great discussion. They enjoyed, and many have already started following you on your social media platforms. And, this is what this is about, sharing good, new, and emerging information so that we can all be educated and a little wiser than we were yesterday. And I don't know where Marco Polo came from, but shout out to each and every one of you who have joined the conversation and made yourselves known in the chat. A lot of y'all didn't get to see, but I saw 42 Tribes came in earlier, and I know I'm missing somebody. But in Rashu, thank you for joining the conversation. Our good brother Sean and Jehuti Ma'at and others. So, please, before you leave, like the video and share the video so those who didn't catch us live can catch the archives, and make sure that you hit up both websites, the designrootsafrica.com when it goes live. So make sure that you hit the you look up our guest on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And the Twitter address is a little different, and so I put it up somewhere. I gotta scroll. Here we go. And so you'll be able to find them on Twitter at this address. And so by the end of this month, no doubt, the book will be released, and and maybe we can do another show, after everyone has read the text, and to discuss what was in it and their feelings about the what they learned. So thank you, Tamika, for reminding them to again like and share and subscribe to the channel and like the show. So any last words before we go?
Thank you, sir. I'm grateful. I'm really excited to be connected with you and bringing the truth out on this subject to the world.
Appreciate it. And let's see if I have any announcements other than, again, 2023. The text will be coming out, Race and Identity in Ancient Egypt, Volume 1, Towards an Etymology of the Place Named Kemet. It's still going through some edits, as you can see, and some peer review. And on next Thursday at 8 p.m., I will be speaking on the Hoppy channel. It was a documentary film that I was in. They now have a YouTube channel. And, I will be talking about the Kemet controversy and some of my latest findings along those lines. So y'all stay tuned for that. And again, thanking our guests for coming on and sharing. And of course, I have a spam risk call in the middle of the show, but it's all good. But thank you for coming and sharing your wisdom. And I look forward to diving more into the text and continuing this conversation. So with that said, until next time, y'all be easy. Peace.